My name is Angie McKinney, and I'm with the IEP Resource Center, and I'm a school psychologist by background, and I've also been an assistant director of special education. And so I've gotten a chance to see many, many case conferences over the years, some that have been great, and I've learned a lot from those teachers who've run the conferences, also some that I hope to never see those kind of examples again. So again, we always learn from the good and the bad, and hopefully everybody will get something out of that today. Here's what our agenda looks like. We have only a half a day, so it's a pretty short training. We're going to start with looking at a lot of the common issues that tend to lead to those negative meetings that we have. And they kind of can be chunked into specific issues that we see time and time again. And then we're going to look at things that we can do that are preventative or fix-up strategies for before the conference ever starts, things that we can do, things that we do during the conference, and then also follow-up activities for after the conference that help it be more successful and lead to future successful meetings. Any questions from anyone before we start? Is that kind of what you were expecting for today? Okay. I will let you know that our office also provides facilitated IEP services. So for free, we will send a facilitator out upon request from both a school and a parent to go and help be a neutral person to help run a conference. And especially those conferences that you have a history of having some difficulty, or maybe you've held a conference and it didn't result in a signed IEP for whatever reason. And so we send a team member out to facilitate those meetings and help them be more positive. Because of that, we've learned a lot of things because we get called into some of the most contentious meetings that are being held around the state. So we've seen a lot of things that have led to positive outcomes, as well as those things that you kind of walk out knowing this is why everyone's struggling. Now, the training that we're doing today, some of that comes from some of the training that our facilitative team has gotten, but I don't want anyone to think that this training is training you to be a facilitator, because it's not the same kind of training. It's just a lot of the same kind of techniques, and there's no magic. It's not a hard process. It's simple things that we tend to forget to do that can make all the difference in the world. And I know even the things that I'm going to tell you today, I can tell you that I don't always do all of these things. We run out of time. We have limited options of things like our meeting room. There are just so many other things going on that we have a lot of, I wish I had remembered to do that kind of scenarios. So don't think that this is a prescriptive, you have to do everything on these lists in order to have a successful meeting. Okay? So let's dig right in to the common issues, and I don't think any of them are going to be any kind of surprise. These are the things that we struggle with in conferences. And some of the struggles are on the school end, some of the struggles are on the parent end, and sometimes the parents and the school are doing great, and it's some of the outside professionals that come in that we struggle with. So it just varies based on every conference. So the issues, there are a lot of issues around communication. People feeling like they are not being heard. They're not getting the communication in the first place. I didn't know where the meeting was going to be held. I didn't know when it was going to be held. Somebody contacted me the day before the meeting and expected me to be there. Those kinds of issues. A lot of issues related to preparation. There are so many things that we tend to run out of time to take care of before the meetings. But boy, does it make a difference in having everything that we need before we even start. And as a school person, to come into a meeting well prepared, it just presents such a different picture to a parent who is thinking, I'm putting my child in your hands. And if you come in kind of a scrambled mess, they get a very different picture about who they're leaving their kid with all day long. Issues around clarity, and we'll talk more about that as we get to the different sections and some of the different strategies. But there are a lot of things that are either unclear before a meeting or things that seemed clear during the meeting, and then when the IEP document itself gets disseminated, it doesn't look the same, or the wording is not the same as what we decided on during the meeting. Issues about respect. I honestly, I don't know where to credit this because I just heard this recently. But I heard somebody just say that respect is a lot like air. If it's there, we don't think anything about it. We don't even notice it's there. If it isn't there, that's all we can think about. And I think from both a school and a parent perspective, if there is a lack of respect on either end, everyone notices. And that's all that we're thinking about. And then issues related to transparency. Just making sure that everything is on the table, that there are no hidden agendas, that we make sure and be as clear as possible with everyone who's involved in the conference. Okay, so we're going to talk about different strategies that we can use to help with all of these issues at every step of the way in the case conference process. All right, so before the meeting. And I say this way to the fun because I think, everybody thinks, oh my gosh, here I've got another round of case conferences coming up. And case conferences could be a time that we're sharing all the positive things that have happened, all the growth that a student has made. I mean, if we really think about them as this is a time to showcase everything that happened in the past year and now plan for what's happening in this next year, this could be a really good experience for everyone. But that's not usually the case. Usually we're dreading the meeting. We're trying to cram it into an already filled schedule. And I didn't ask you guys, for our people who are here, are you guys all teachers, parents? Teacher?
Special education coordinator.
Coordinator, okay. Both special ed teachers? Okay. All right, so here's one of the first issues, and this should seem like a no-brainer, but it isn't really. The law says that we have to hold our conferences at a mutually agreed on time and place. Now, how you interpret that can vary from person to person. What this doesn't mean is that it has to be exactly where and when the school says, or exactly where and when the parent says. If a parent says, I can only hold meetings on a Saturday night at 8 o'clock, the school's probably not going to mutually agree on that time, right? But you do have to come to some kind of agreement. I know schools will usually say, well, we can only hold meetings within contract hours for teachers. And that doesn't necessarily hold up either. So you have to work with the parent. The more notice that you can give, the more likely that they can find a little bit of flexibility in their schedule to be able to meet during the school day. But I know some schools that will hold things before school hours or after school just to make sure that we do get our parents there. So lots and lots of notice. Some teachers, I've seen some great examples of teachers who have used their online calendar system to go ahead and put in the ACR dates for all of the kids on their caseload. And then they put some kind of a notice maybe a month in advance so that they at least start setting up those conferences with parents a month ahead of time. They're much more likely to get the parents there. And they're much more likely to be able to schedule them early enough to where if we have a snow delay or some kind of crazy schedule change or illness or whatever, that we still have time to reschedule and make it happen in a timely manner. Offer plenty of dates. If we can have several dates available, some teachers will send parents a notice saying, I've got these different times, indicate your first, second, and third choice, and then they try to put together a schedule that works for everybody. You do have to put it in writing. Now, what is required to be in that notice is all contained within Article 7. So even though I have called the parent and I have emailed the parent and they have agreed to come in and they come in, they actually attend the meeting, if I didn't put all the required pieces in that written notice, which is what you can generate from the IEP system, then it hasn't officially gone to the parent in writing. Okay? And sometimes it's hard to remember that, but I know I have one school that I work with, and I love this school, but often I noticed that the case conference notice was not generated until the morning of the conference. Now the parent knew and the parent was there, but that doesn't hold up if the Department of Education pulls your files to look at when was that notice generated, and did the parent truly get written notice, prior written notice of the conference. Okay? It's critical that we have parents there. I know some parents will say, go ahead, hold the meeting without me. By law, that's okay. We've tried to get the parent there. We've done all these other things to ensure that they could participate. We offer to them, if you can't come, can you tell me what your recommendations are? We do all those things to try and get parent involvement. But the bottom line is, it's not the same without the parent there. We don't truly get the kind of input we need without having them there in person. So even though it fulfills that legal requirement that we did all these things, I would still kind of count this as less than successful if the parent is not there. So we make a lot of effort to get them there. If you can get that time commitment from the parent first and then work with your school staff after that, that's usually the best route to take. And then also think about the meeting length, because we know some of our meetings take a lot longer than others. We have some meetings that we know it's just standard, it's probably only going to run 45 minutes. And then we have other meetings that we go ahead and block out 2 to 3 hours because we know it's going to take that long. But we want to make sure that if we say, okay, we're going to meet at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, and we know it's going to be a long meeting, that all the people who are invited know it's probably going to be a longer meeting, and they have to have that available in their schedule in order to make it work. So you probably want to revisit that when you first start your meeting too, and you start looking at your agenda to say, can everyone still stay until this time? Okay, the purpose of the meeting, and the purpose of the meeting is listed when you generate the notice of conference. You have to select that within the IEP system. But we have to make sure it's accurate. And thinking about whether this is going to be satisfying that annual case review where we're setting new year-long goals for the student. Is it a manifestation determination? Are we coming together to talk about evaluation results? This seems like it would be easy, but sometimes we don't always mark all the purposes of conference that are needed. And I have had a situation where I've been at a conference, the ACR, the annual review, was not marked, and the parent refused to write new year-long goals because she said, that you didn't tell me this was going to be an ACR, so I'm expecting goals that will just carry us through the remainder of that initial IEP, or the IEP that was done for that year. This was a follow-up meeting. So I think parents have to know why we're meeting. And we all have to know, because that's going to make a difference about what kind of data we bring, whether or not we need to do things like updated transition information. There are a lot of things to consider depending on what the purpose of the meeting is. All right, who needs to be there? We all know that there are some key roles that have to be filled based on what kind of meeting we're having, what the purpose of the meeting is, and what the background of the student is, what they're eligible for or are suspected to be eligible for. We have to have different bodies there. We can also have additional bodies, and that's fine. But this is really important to know that we've got all the legally required people there and that everybody understands why they're coming. We have a lot of, especially general education teachers and administrators, who aren't really sure why they're sitting at that table. This last piece comes from a real example for me. I sat down to a meeting, an initial evaluation meeting for a high school student, and the parent was there. The student was not yet in there. She had not been pulled from class. And the gen ed teacher came in and sat down and looked at the parent and said, "I don't really know who your daughter is. I'm not sure why I'm here." And besides, wanting to take that person by the neck and shake them really good, I thought, you know what, that should fall back on me somewhat, because all of the people that are invited to a meeting that I might be running, I should be letting them know not only why are you coming, but what are you expected to bring. If I'm expecting you to bring your grade book with you, or some examples of the student's work, or behavior data from your classroom, I should be telling the teacher that, whoever is in charge of setting up that meeting. But we need to kind of train people to say, "No, I'm just here because I got the notice and it said I had to come, but I'm here to share information about what I'm seeing in the classroom. I'm here as a gen ed teacher to talk about grade level standards that you all may not know about, because I should be the expert on that." Just making sure that we are very clear with all the people who are coming, that at least that we've invited. Now, we know that a parent can bring anyone that they feel like should come with them, and the school can also invite other people that they feel like has the knowledge or expertise to contribute to the conference. And those are up to either the school or the parent to decide who's appropriate to bring. Those excusals, try to avoid excusals unless we have to have them. I know we can ask for excusals for required members. They do have to provide written input, and the requirement by law is that those excusals have to be in writing from the parent prior to the conference. That's why it gets pulled into that notice of conference that should go out ahead of time. What we don't want to do is wait until we're starting the meeting and the parent's sitting there in a room full of people and say, "Oh, by the way, Mrs. So-and-so can't come. Is that okay with you? Here, sign." Because most parents are going to sign even if they're not comfortable with it, because they're on the spot. They're under pressure. Now, there are times when that's not going to fly, right? We have times when the only person that could fill that role is sick, and you didn't know it until everybody's sitting around that table, and Mrs. Smith, the speech pathologist, is out sick, or whatever the situation is. And that's when you have to make a decision about, do we reschedule, or can we document that and say, we had no choice, but the parent is consenting to this. And it is mainly just a courtesy thing. I think even for the non-required members, it's very helpful to know who might have to leave when. Because even say we have 2 or 3 gen ed teachers that are coming in. Some high school conferences, you'll have multiple teachers. And one is fulfilling that role of the gen ed teacher and needs to stay from start to finish. And maybe the next teacher is only going to stay for 15 minutes because they need to get back to class. That is okay. You do not need an excusal. But you need to know that that person's leaving because you want to get their input before the time's up. And you also want to be able to explain to the parent, now this teacher is staying the whole time. This person is in that role, and this person will be leaving. They don't have to consent to that. But it certainly is courtesy, and if you say, we just wanted to let you know, most teachers aren't going to, or most parents are not going to have a problem with that. Oh, and then the other people that may be in the conference. Lawyers. Lawyers are always fun to have in a conference. Has anybody ever attended a conference with a lawyer present? Oh, you guys have gotten lucky because it makes for a long conference. And it's not that they can't add to the conference, because they certainly do, but there's a lot of questioning and reinterpreting and restating, and it just, if I know there's going to be an attorney at a conference, I plan for a longer conference. That's just all there is to it. Advocates. We've got some great advocates around the state. We have some that it makes it more difficult to have a conference, but I would tell you that I'd say 95% of the conferences I have with advocates are better because the advocates are there. Friends and family members, lots of service providers. We may have outside counselors, therapists. We have a lot of different kinds of services that are provided. Interpreters. We have an interpreter here today. It's the only issue that I've ever had is making sure I have plenty of space so that everything is angled at the right way to make things flow more successfully. Parents don't have to tell you if they're bringing someone. It's not in the law that says that they have to. And so you can't just shut down a conference because mom brought 3 people with her. You just have to make sure you have plenty of space. It does help you to know in advance. I think the only exception to that I don't know if it's actually addressed in the law anywhere, but I know that schools, as a regular practice, if the parent brings an attorney to a meeting and they didn't know that attorney was coming, they will stop the meeting, reschedule, and have another meeting so that their attorney can be present as well. And that's pretty much standard practice. But again, I'm not really sure how it fits in the law, unless, it's messing with a deadline somewhere, and then there may be another decision that has to happen. Okay, meeting space. You do have to make sure that you've got a room big enough to accommodate all the people who are coming. And you want to ideally have a room that has plenty of chairs and that all the chairs are the same size. I mean, I've been in the conferences where the teacher's in her comfy office chair, and then everybody's in like the little kids' chairs where you can't even hardly get down into the chair, let alone get back up. If you do have like the bad chair, just don't let the parent be the one sitting in the bad chair. Make sure somebody else takes that. I say no one in the back pews. I attended a conference last year where a parent and 2 advocates came into a meeting, and there were quite a few chairs at kind of separated tables like these in a big square shape. And then there were also like these other chairs in a viewing kind of area, and they all sat there. I said, well, go ahead and find your spaces wherever you guys want to sit. They said, no, we always sit back here. I'm like, oh, no. I mean, that really just destroys the playing field right from the beginning to say, okay, we all are meeting and you all sit over here, right? Everyone needs to be at the table. Otherwise, that table is simply just not big enough. You want to make sure that you've got, temperature. It's not too hot, not too cold. All those things that we have very little control over in the schools, right? You usually can't even touch your thermostat in the schools. Clutter-free, you may have a parent in a wheelchair. You may have somebody carting a stroller with them. There are a lot of things that we may need to consider about the space. Okay, so I don't know if you could really see what was on the screen there, but there, you know, he fiddled with the chair to make one leg longer than the others, made the lights flicker. Anytime you've got fluorescent lights that are flickering, it's a distraction. It makes you uncomfortable. Jacking up the temperature or turning it way down. I am not the same person if I'm super hot or super cold. I'm not concentrating well. And sometimes that makes a big difference in what you get out of a group. If you have a staff meeting and you're all in a nice, comfortable location and everybody's got their needs met and they're not having to think about all this other stuff, you're going to get a lot more productivity out of that group than you are with everyone sitting in a room doing this and that's all they can think about is how cold it is, right? We don't want to set up a situation where we're trying to pull power plays in a meeting. I worked in Omaha Public Schools for a year during an internship, and whenever we would have meetings that we knew were going to be horrible, then we had these student personnel advocates that we could invite to come with us, and they were like the heavy hitters. I don't even know what they were exactly. I think they might have been social workers by background mostly, but we would invite these people to come with us into a meeting, and they were like the ultimate people to act as kind of those LEA reps. And I had one particular woman, and she was great at her job, but whenever she needed to go to a really nasty meeting, she wore her red power suit, and she was probably about 5'11" already, and then she'd wear these power heels, right? And then she would come in, and she wanted to sit on like a bar stool kind of seat so that she was way up above everybody else, right? We can't do that. I mean, if we do that, parents already are intimidated enough, even if they don't act like it. They are intimidated coming into a school and dealing with a whole group of professionals, no matter what their backgrounds are. We don't want to add to those feelings that they have. Anybody have any examples they want to share on any of these issues? Just feel free to jump in if you do. Making sure to prepare the room beforehand. I know we were kind of scrambling at the last minute with the snow to get all the equipment set up today, make sure it was all working right. And if that's the case in an IEP meeting, you lose time, right? When you come in and the computer's not set up and nobody's made the copies yet and nobody's gone down to get the parent, there's all this stuff that leads to a delay in time that we already don't have, right? We barely have enough time to get all these IEP meetings done in the first place. Think about whether we need wall space, whether we're going to be projecting on a screen, whether we're going to need a flip chart, again, whether we need extra space in the room for somebody with mobility issues, all those kinds of things that we need to know ahead of time. We may not have much control over room arrangement. There are some times when we do. And we ought to be pretty deliberate about the kind of room arrangement that we set up when we have that option. A circle table's great, right? You can pretty much see everybody when you're at a circle, especially if it's a smaller group. You get a lot more eye contact. There is no head of the table, so everybody is at an equal point when you're sitting on a circle. But if you're viewing a screen, you've got this whole section of the table that can't see anything, just like going to any training where you're sitting at a circle. It's not really good if you've got a facilitator, if you've got a lot of charts or anything like that. When you have a rectangular table, you get most people who's on even grid. Now this I know is an extreme long table, and normally it wouldn't be that big. But those pieces on the end here, it's a hard position to be in. And there's a lot of times where everyone kind of arranges themselves and then leaves that open space for maybe a principal or sometimes the parent. The parent does not want to be sitting on those end chairs because they feel like they're on display. Sometimes you have a little bit more difficulty because this person and this person, we're doing one of these to have a conversation and everybody else is leaning back. It's harder to get as much conversation as you need to. I like to have this open arrangement in the U shape best when I'm facilitating. But I only facilitate a handful of meetings here and there. I'd rather have something like this if there's no facilitator or no need for charts or screens or anything like that. But it is nice here because with this kind of situation, you do have a focal point. You can put your screen or your charts in the front. And sometimes it's good to be able to say, okay, I know Mom cannot stand Mrs. Smith, so I'm going to put Mrs. Smith over here and maybe Mom here so that they can communicate, but there's some distance too at the same time. So I think every kind of arrangement that you could possibly use, you've got some pros and cons, and you just need to think about what would be best for the kind of meeting that you're going to have, the kind of group you're going to have, and what those needs are. Yeah. I think a lot of those conference rooms, too, have like the biggest, chunkiest table that it looks like it should be in some corporate boardroom that we got like as a hand-me-down to the school. And there is no separating it. There's no rearranging it. There's just nothing we can do. But sometimes when you have those really tricky meetings, you're holding it in like the special room or at the administrative office or something like that because there are so many more bodies that go into those kind of meetings. So just think about what you can do with the space that you have. Preparing information ahead of time. If you have outside reports, and we all love those outside reports that are written for university professors, and you get a report from a hospital kind of clinic, and although it's got good information, it is not written for people to just read and use, unfortunately. I was at a conference last year, and the psychologist had taken all of the outside reports for this student and had made summary charts of here's the most important stuff from this, so that we didn't spend an hour going through every page of this outside report. We spent about 15 minutes really hitting the stuff that was important for school. And it was so helpful to have all that information already summarized. Anytime that you can present charts and graphs to parents, it makes things so much more easy to understand. And this last bullet, there are so many times that we go into a conference and wish we had data collected on something that we're going to have to now go back and do, but we needed it to make decisions during the conference. So we need to think in advance about, is there data that we need to collect prior to even holding the conference, and get it done? Or, assign somebody to go and collect it for you. Draft IEPs are not required by law, but boy, do they help. When we can put some information into draft form or type some of the information into the IEP system in advance, it makes things go so much more quickly. Now, what you can't do is print out a copy of last year's IEP and consider that a draft as a start for the next year's IEP. And I've seen people do this. And in fact, it even has old dates and old information about grades from last year and all sorts of things that it was more laziness than anything in this case. So even if you're not going to put a lot of the draft information in, figure out what you do need to erase from last year's stuff, so that you've got something rolling for the next year. Think about if there's anything that you need to give to the parent in advance. If they need to get a report in advance, or summaries of progress, a draft of the IEP. Some schools I know will actually write a fairly detailed draft and give that to the parent in advance. An agenda for the meeting, if it's going to be anything other than the usual IEP flow, if you're going to have some additional information in there, you may want to share that in advance. And I just say here, if you're going to give bad news especially, don't wait and spring it on somebody in the conference. At least if you send something home in advance, the parent, even if it's going to produce some negative emotions, at least they will have time to process it and maybe even ask some questions before you get into that conference. There are times when you share things in a conference and it pulls out all those emotions, right? And then there's no processing from then on. It's like you're stuck in that, oh my gosh, what have I just been told? And, if I'm being told your child's not going to graduate on time because this is happening, and that's all that's on my mind for the rest of the time period that I'm sitting in that room. So we want to make sure that we're giving plenty of information in advance. Okay, so that is all stuff that you want to think about before we ever start the meeting. Now, during the meeting, again, this stuff should seem like, oh yeah, well, duh, of course we do this, right? But we don't always. Simple greeting of parents, it can make such a big difference. You don't want to have somebody buzz you from the office and then say, okay, yeah, send them down the hall, right? Somebody should go up and greet the parent. And some of our school secretaries are just phenomenal. Others, I'm scared to go in those buildings because you walk in and you get the, yes, what do you need? Like, okay, no, welcome to Smith Elementary, If you can let the front office staff know, I'm expecting Mrs. Johnson today for an IEP meeting. So when she comes in, let me know and just have her sit down and I'll come and get her. Just something so it isn't just a parent standing there, especially in a high school where when you walk in the front office, you probably got 10 high school kids all running around, some in trouble, some late, all this stuff going on, and a parent may just stand there for 10 minutes not really even getting any attention. Okay, so greet the parents and then really consider that you don't want to have a whole room full of people already seated at the table with that one spot for the parent and you walk them into this. Because for somebody right now, if they walk into this training and are like, okay, now you're self-conscious about where you're going to sit and am I going to make any noise? And, there's only the one seat left. What am I going to do? It's not that you want people to be late, but you want the parent to feel comfortable from the get-go, from the second they walk in that room. And that can make a big difference. So even if it's just having 2 staff walk up to get the parent, or a staff member with maybe the student, if the student's going to attend the meeting, and have them go up to greet the parent. But again, make them feel like we are glad you took the time to show up here and to be part of this. Make sure to seat the parent in kind of that priority spot. Now, probably the number one priority is where is the teacher going to sit that they can actually plug into a plug and have their computer up and running. That's what a lot of people are concerned about, and I understand that. If you're going to project or have any kind of charting, make sure the parent can see that clearly. You don't want their back turned to everything. You want them to be able to communicate with everyone. You want to make sure that if the parent comes with somebody else, that there's some seating so that they could sit together. You don't want to deliberately separate people unless they want to be, right? Sometimes we get mom and dad who are no longer together, and it's hard enough to get them in the same room, but they may not want to sit side by side, and that's fine too. Just try and be aware of what those issues are. So the whole purpose of setting up your room and deciding where people should sit are just to promote that positive communication and making sure that nobody feels like, well, this is obviously the person in charge because they're sitting in this spot, right? So as welcoming as possible. Speaking of welcoming, and again, I know, first thing I'm probably going to hear in the chat is we have no money. No money for coffee, no money for snacks, no money for bottled water. Sometimes just having that stuff available, though, can make such a big difference. I had a meeting earlier this year, and it was in the principal's office, which also doubled as a conference room. And the principal had her Keurig machine in there and extra cups and told the parent, you know, here, you're welcome to help yourself. There was bottled water in there. Sometimes even not just snacks, but even like mints on the table. Something like that can make a big difference. It feels more welcoming. And sometimes you're in those meetings for a long time. You need to think about whether or not, if your meeting starts at 11 and it's going to run until 2, I'm going to be starving. I'm going to be complaining about I can't concentrate because my stomach's rumbling, right? So think about what time of the day it is and if it would be appropriate to have that kind of stuff there. Pens and notepads, they are cheap and we get them everywhere. Every time we go to a hotel to do training, I end up walking out with like 20, 30 pens that were laying on the table that didn't get picked up. Yeah, I see you guys have Holiday Inn or Hilton Garden Inn pens. I've got like 1,000 of those things. We paid for them, right? So I'm going to take them with me, and I take them and hand them out at schools when I go because you can't really find pens. But I tell you, if everybody's set up in this room with a computer probably, they usually have a notebook and a pen. A lot of parents aren't thinking to bring that kind of stuff with them, and it's like you feel naked, right? You walk in and everybody's taking notes and I don't even have a pen. So just having a few of those extra, just scrap things on the table can make them feel more, as far as status, they feel equalized. Introductions, and I think most people are pretty good about making those introductions. Now, the one thing that I think we could do a better job at is really sharing the role that we have. And it's going to take training your own staff who are there. When you introduce yourself, tell them who you are. If you're a teacher, tell them what you teach. But why am I here? And again, it goes back to making sure everyone who is there knows why they're there and what they're adding to the discussion. So it may be that the general ed teacher says, you know, I'm Mrs. Green and I teach Billy for math, and so I want to share how he's doing in math class as well as what his behavior is like in math. The building principal or whoever is serving as the LEA rep or building rep, whatever term that you're using, also should be very clear on saying, I'm here to help with this discussion and to be able to commit to the services that we write in the IEP. So that person is the person who says, okay, you guys have designed this IEP. Yes, we can do that. I'm committing the district services or the school building services to that student. Parents are probably just going to say, well, I'm just his mom or I'm just his dad or whatever, and that's okay. You don't need to retrain the parents on all the things that they're bringing. But oftentimes I will say, and you're the biggest expert, because they are. They've been with this kid forever. They've been through the bad times and the good times and the potty training and all that kind of stuff that we didn't see as school staff members. Make sure that you try, this is sometimes hard, but that you try to keep that same level of formality. When you start using titles for certain people and not other people, it sets up that power differentiation right from the beginning. So if I'm introduced as Dr. McKinney, and then this is Barb, already you've got a perceived difference, right? So I don't, unless there is a specific need because I've got somebody else in the conference who needs to know that I know my stuff, the doctor stuff is off the table for me. It's first name and last name, or Mrs., or whatever you're going to use. But if it's going to be, superintendents and principals can kind of get picky about how they're introduced. And if that's the case, then mom is Mrs. Green or Mrs. Smith or whatever. And you may even introduce the student as, Mr. this or Miss that. But it does make a big difference when you set it up from the beginning of this person has a title and then this is mom. And you don't want that. You want to have it either formal or casual, but consistent. You also need to think about if there are other roles. So if you do have somebody who's a note taker, you want to point out that they're the note taker, number one, so that they know they're the note taker and that I'm counting on you to take these notes. But also so that the parents or other people in there know this is why this person is typing or writing or whatever. If somebody is in charge of being the timekeeper, you want to make sure somebody knows this person's going to be watching the time so that we don't get too far behind or so that we end on time. And there may be other roles as well. Agendas. Definitely use an agenda. And I know a lot of us don't because we know we've got an IEP process, right? We're going to be following that IEP from start to finish. We do it every time. But you also know that whenever you're in a conference, even in the easiest of conferences, that the conversation doesn't always follow the agenda. So sometimes we start talking about things like services or accommodations before we've even gotten through all the present levels. We jump around. And the IEP process is supposed to be in a certain order. That's the way it's written in the law, and that's why the IEP system follows that prescribed order. So if we have an agenda, it's very easy to say, okay, this is the agenda we're going to use. So if we get off track, I'm just going to point us back to where we need to be, and we will get there. I promise we'll get to all those things. But don't take offense. I just need us to follow this agenda. It makes it so much easier if we agree on it in the beginning for me to correct a group and pull them back to the agenda. Nobody seems to take offense when I say, we can't talk about that yet, but we will. I promise we will. Here's where it is in the agenda. I've not had any problems with any participants. Okay. And I'm going to repeat that because they probably couldn't hear that. The question was about that the IEP draft prints in a slightly different order than when you work through the system itself. And Matt's answer was that's something that is hopefully going to be looked at and reworked in the future, but don't count on it happening until summer or after. So the suggestion was to send an agenda home so that the parent could note any concerns on each section of the agenda and bring those to the conference. And so that it would be kind of in the proper order. And one of the things that I do, the agenda that I use, and I don't think I have it in the PowerPoint here, but when I go to facilitate a meeting, it's a pretty general agenda. There are 1,000 things that we do during the course of an IEP meeting. But, generally we're going to have those introductions and roles. I use ground rules within a meeting just because I know that I'm being called to meetings that are more difficult. And then it's all about present levels and everything involved in present levels. setting up those goals and objectives if needed, talking about services. And again, I know there's lots of stuff in between there, but those are kind of those big headers. And then wrap up. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is we need to know where the kid is, where we want them to go, and what we're going to do to get them there. Those are the three big things involved in IEP planning. Again, just once you have that agenda, and I tend to do one on a chart and say, okay, is this going to work for everybody? If not, we need to tweak it right now. Or if there is a particular issue that is on someone's mind that we have to talk about this, even though I know we're going to, if I can show them on the agenda and write it on there that this is where we're going to talk about it, in the grand scheme of things, this is the point that we will talk about it, I go ahead and put it on there. Because otherwise they're always wondering, are we ever going to get around to talking about this? Especially when you're talking about those issues like, say maybe we're talking about placement at another school or a facility. That's a huge, huge issue. When are we going to talk about it? Because they want to talk about it right here. And it really doesn't come until we talk about services and placement. Okay, ground rules. It certainly doesn't hurt to ever use ground rules. I use them in all facilitated meetings. And I use basically the same ones over and over again, but sometimes we add new ones because somebody in the group says, I really think we need to add this to our ground rules. They're just basic rules that you would have for any kind of meeting, but if we agree to them ahead of time, then someone can enforce them when you do violate them. So these are what we tend to use. Listen respectfully, share information openly, ask questions, stick to the agenda, one person talks at a time. I mean, those are really basic. I had a meeting earlier this year that the group decided they also needed the ground rule of, it was something like the past is the past. Because there was too much of a tendency for that group to want to rehash all the things that had been wrong in the past. And they needed to start from here. Today is today, and we're moving forward. And it really helped just to have that there so that if somebody slipped into talking about it, we could say, now remember, we agreed the past is the past, and we're not going to talk about the past. Okay? These I would have posted as well. If you don't have them posted, they're just not, you're not thinking about them. So we keep them on a chart, keep them in the conference room, they're always there. Okay, the issue about mutual respect. Everyone's time has to be valued. Parents' time, the students' time, the teacher's time, everyone. If we can really focus on this student, nothing else that's going on, not the woes of the school and the financial crisis that we're in, not the basketball game that happened last night, not this student's older brother who we have the same issues with, right? We sometimes slip into talking about lots of other things when if we can keep it focused solely on the student, then we're really going to be keeping things in a better time frame. If we're prepared, start on time, end on time, all of those things show respect for everyone who's there. Respecting input. Now, respecting input doesn't mean we agree with everything, because everything that everyone says is not good, right? I mean, I have ideas that I give at staff meetings that sometimes people will say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, and other times where, yeah, Dale's looking at me and says, oh, you're crazy, right? But we don't say you're crazy. We say, okay, we do all those things that say, I heard you, I'm listening, I'm not really on board with it yet, but I appreciate you offering that. And we do that through eye contact is a big one, staying off your phone, staying off your computer, all that kind of stuff, using those nonverbals, giving the head nods, or even if it's, sometimes somebody will offer something and I'm like, Okay, I can see your point. However, and it's okay. It's okay to argue. It's okay to disagree as long as we do it respectfully. Those sidebar conversations and the note passing and that kind of stuff, again, even if it's all directly related to the student, is still a distraction and still cuts on the respect of the entire group and the focus of the group. Notice of procedural safeguards. Okay, this is kind of a tricky subject for a lot of people. We have to give those notice of procedural safeguards to parents, and we have to know when we have to give it to them. Okay, I think in the past, like 10 years ago, every time we saw a parent, we were coming with our notice of procedural safeguards saying, please, you have to take this from me. I have to show that I gave this. And now there's some key times, at least once a year, if you're moving towards having a manifestation. There are all those different times that you have to give it, and you just have to know what those times are. It doesn't really say that at every time we give it, we have to read it to the parent, explain it to the parent, anything like that. But what it does say is when it talks about consent, it says that parents basically have to get it before they can truly give informed consent. They have to understand what they're agreeing to. And it's not just that they're agreeing to an evaluation or a placement. It's all the stuff that comes with it, too, and understanding what's in those parent rights. So I think we do have an obligation to talk about it. We have to explain what you're signing on for, what you're getting into. And I kind of have my own little spiel, I guess, that when I meet with a parent, a lot of teachers will say, okay, here are your parent rights. And if you have any questions after you read this, like anyone's going to sit down and read the Notice of Procedural Safeguards thoroughly, then you can always ask. And what's a parent going to say at that meeting? I don't get any of it, or I did have, and this is probably 15 years ago, that I had a parent we were already in a complaint situation, and my director was with me, and the director said, would you like me to explain these to you, or would you like me to read them to you? And the parent said, read them. So for the next 45 minutes, we sat and listened to her read them, and it was painful. So my director, though, was very good and had given all staff members basically a cheat sheet of the summary of how to explain key sections of the procedural safeguards. So, it talked about confidentiality, talked about that, even though you've signed for this evaluation and you're here at the meeting, even if we say your child is eligible, it still takes your signature to actually put an IEP in place that first time. Talks about what to do when you're unhappy as a parent. If you can get kind of those key areas down, not every single section in detail, you'd be there all day, but it's something that you can explain the highlights in probably 3 minutes, So think about what you want to tell a parent when you give them their rights to say, here are the most important things you need to know for today, but you can always call me with any questions about any of the other pieces that you read.